one. Man, we got Lance Zierlein. We got Daniel Jeremiah talking about Bo Nix in the top 15 overall. Like, what are we talking about here right now, Kyle?
I just don't see it. I just don't see it. You want to take him on day 2? I get it. He doesn't feel like a first round pick to me.
I mean,
but all it takes is one team.
It does. It just takes one. Maybe someone trades up at the end of the first. I don't know, but we should probably go ahead and just jump right into it because that's going to be a deep conversation right there. Good afternoon, Dynasty Nation. This is the Dynasty Green Room. I am your host, Jeff DiMatteo of Gridiron Ratings. With me, as always, my co-host, one of my favorite NFL analysts and fantasy football players of all time. All time, Kyle. That's a big one. Kyle Lindemann from Rotoballer. Kyle, how you doing?
Doing good, man. I kind of had a moment of peace this week. All the underclassmen have to declare for the draft, so things are taking shape. No more having to guess, is this guy staying? Is this guy going? You know what I mean?
True. I saw a lot of those guys go back to school, and you say moment of peace, and I watched a lot of film on those guys, anticipating them coming out, and I'm throwing papers in the air, completely pissed because I'm sitting here thinking, I got all this work, Hayes in the barn, feeling great. Now none of those guys are coming out this year, and I'm just like, good grief. We could talk about underclassmen all day. We'll probably get into them shortly after the Senior Bowl, which is coming up real soon. But this week, we're going to cover quarterbacks in earnest. We're going to talk about the top 6 guys, kind of what we expect, some strengths, maybe some areas of opportunity, some red flags we've noticed on some of these players, and some of the things they're going to have to do to become fantasy viable, and maybe even some positive landing spots. So before we get too deep into the players specifically, let's talk about the class as a whole. Take me through what you think about this group compared to maybe what we've seen in the last 4, 5, 6 years.
I mean, I would say it's very good. If we look back at 2020, I think 2020 is going to be probably the best quarterback class in like 20 years. Burrow, Herbert, Tua, Jordan Love, Jalen Hurts. I mean, those are the first 5 guys taken. That was a heck of a class. 2021, I mean, we were so pumped about Trevor Lawrence, but even he's kind of been middle of the road. Nobody else has really stepped up. 2022 was really a down year. I think 2023 has got some potential, depending if they can get Bryce Young figured out. Obviously, CJ Stroud's been unbelievable. It's funny because I always like to combine like draft classes just to get an idea. And I told people this on Twitter, like probably 8 months ago. I said, look, if you combine these classes, Caleb Williams and Drake Maye would probably get drafted over Bryce Young and CJ Stroud.
Agreed. I think this class is probably, it's funny you mentioned that 2020 class, and I forgot that we had Hurts in there and Love was in there, and all those guys look like high-level starters right now. And, you look at this class, and it's like, man, where did they forget against last year's group? Last year's group, to me, Bryce Young was my guy. Jury's still out. But I had them pretty far behind some of those classes, specifically Trevor Lawrence was really good. The guys in 2020, they were way behind. This group in 2024 seems like it's miles ahead, though. The top 4 or 5 guys, I think, could have gone number 1 last year, which is pretty telling for the strength of the group. But man, I think it might be hard pressed to keep up with that 2020 group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think 2020 is definitely not the exception. I think maybe it could be closer to 2018. We'll have a couple of guys that are flashes, a couple of guys who maybe disappoint. Maybe somebody emerges from day 2. That's just the hard part. We have to remember there's only 32 starting quarterback spots.
Right.
As much as we want people to succeed, not like receiver where, a team could play, every team could play 3 receivers, right?
Right, absolutely. Well, and you get a lot more players at running back and receiver due to attrition, more guys in the field, the whole bit. And in fantasy, we're always looking for the elite guy, right? Who's the next elite guy? Well, for the sake of this show and for the sake of the argument, we want to make sure we classify elite as being probably the top 10% of all the players at the position. And by that, I mean the starters. So, hey, there's only
Yeah.
3 players that qualify as elite, right? So the rest of these guys will end up being excellent or very good or some other kind of adjectives we're going to use. We're going to try not to throw around terms like GOAT and elite and this and that, and generational and all of that. We want to be a little conservative with how we view these guys because enough players have to kind of fall into the right architecture, right, in order to see their growth. Trevor Lawrence was exceptionally highly graded. If he missed, everybody in the industry was wrong. That situation in Jacksonville was bad. Urban Meyer was a bad situation, all of that. You had to reset the second year. There's all kinds of other just kind of little bumpiness that's going on in Jacksonville still. I don't know that we've seen his best ball, but that's a whole nother scenario. How about we get into these prospects a little bit and see kind of what we expect them to be moving forward? Why don't we lead off with obviously the number one guy, the one everyone wants, Caleb Williams, quarterback, USC. Talk to me about Caleb's strengths. What do you like most about him?
Well, I think what I like most about him is that he's better when the play breaks down. That he's very, very good at avoiding sacks, which I think is a very underrated stat because it's like, we look at the advanced metrics. I mean, when a quarterback gets sacked, your percentage of that drive ending, it goes up significantly, and you be able to avoid taking sacks. I mean, that was really what plagued Sam Howell this year. He would have these splash plays and he would run around and he would do all these things, and then he would drop back, and then he just couldn't process fast enough. And all of a sudden Washington's starting at 2nd and 20. And it just, with how bad their defense was, there was no way for that to be sustainable. Nobody can do that. So I like that he doesn't take sacks. I mean, I love his deep ball. I mean, I feel like he can really make all the throws. Probably not the biggest quarterback. I feel like he's mobile. Like, he kind of strikes me as the kind of guy that he's not maybe going to rush for like 500 yards in a season, but like if you leave the middle open, he'll run for 7 yards and pick up the first down all the time. And he had a fair number of rushing touchdowns, so he can move. He's probably going to give you a ton of rushing for fantasy, but I just feel like he's so incredible as a passer. Like, there's not a throw that this guy can't make. He probably, he falls in love sometimes with the trick shots too much, where he loves rolling to the right, throwing off his like back foot, going across his body to the left hash mark. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes.
So now you're talking about an area of opportunity, right? Like, this is, I don't want to say weakness.
Yeah.
Weakness probably isn't the right term because some things are coachable and there's areas for growth. At the end of the day, these are still kids, right? They're young men that are coming into the league here. So we want to be fair to their development. But no, I agree with you. I think his creativity is second to none. His ability to kind of find that crease in the play and run around and make things happen. He always looks like a 10th grader playing against 6th graders. Like, it just never looks quite right. He always looks like he's on a totally different planet than these guys. I don't think that'll be the case at the next level. There's going to be a lot of guys who are going to catch up to him. I think as a strength, the creativity matters. Look at Patrick Mahomes, exceptionally creative player, all kinds of, crazy arm angles and different things that he makes happen that end up on SportsCenter, right? Or end up on like Total Access and NFL Network. I view that as a strength. I think his arm strength, right? His ability to push his weight through the throw, use his whole body. He's not a simple arm thrower. I think all of that's really important. You mentioned in terms of areas of opportunity, you've already mentioned the trick shot, right? He relies a little too heavily on the splash play. I really would like to see him just drop back, release the ball quickly, play in rhythm. I want to see him play more in structure. He's excellent out of structure. But sometimes I feel like, you mentioned the sacks, he forces bad positions more than he should. He ends up in these spots where he drops back, he misses the first read, turns that guy down, doesn't throw the slant or the drag or whatever was there, right? First or second read that was right in his face. And he starts running around waiting for someone to get open deep. And he forces a lot of that scrambling. And then it turns into sacks or incompletions, or sometimes it turns into a huge play, right? I don't know if I want to gamble that much if I'm a head coach. And while a lot of those plays can be really, really good, see Patrick Mahomes, right? The example of when they go right. If they don't go right, you turn into Zach Wilson. And that's where there's a really fine line there. But I think we're splitting hairs. If that's the biggest area of opportunity we have on this guy, I mean, the guy is a pretty flawless prospect, at least physically. The strength, the speed, the size. He might be a little undersized, but I think we're in an NFL now where 6'1", 215 or so. I don't think that's undersized anymore. You would like to have a 6'4", 230 guy, right? But I just don't see that size as a red flag. Now, if he measures at 5'11", it's something different. But those 2
That's
inches
probably
shouldn't
similar
really
to
matter.
Rodgers. I think Rodgers is probably
Right.
what, 6'2", 215, somewhere in there.
Something like that. Yeah. And I'd say Caleb's probably a shade shorter than him. And so if he's at 6 foot, 6'1", look, I'm not worried about the kid's height. He can throw it. He can see over the line. His balls don't get batted at the line of scrimmage. He's not getting into bad positions that way. You know, I guess to me, he deserves to be the number 1 pick. I'm not sure I want to send him to Chicago necessarily. And some people may want to, crucify me for that. But I would love it if some other teams traded up for him. Before we talk about landing spots, though, how about some red flags? Have you noticed anything that maybe isn't an area of opportunity yet, but maybe something you're watching that could pose potential doom for him in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to attack his character sometimes because I feel like that's not fair. I feel like there has been some stuff with him, like a little bit off the field, and some of the stuff he's tweeted, and just some of the stuff that he's said. Hey, I want to go somewhere where I can have ownership of a team, and I mean, it's just like, dude, that's not going to happen.
Right.
So I don't want to, you know what I mean? I feel like it's a fine line. I don't want to say there's character concerns, maybe a few maturity issues, but he is young. I mean, he's what, 21? I mean, so
he's a kid still. But, think about what you were doing at 21, what I was doing at 21. We were not ready to run NFL franchises. We were not ready to be the face of a multi-billion-dollar organization.
I was doing push-ups at Paris Island, South Carolina, so I feel that.
I was probably in Ames, Iowa, and there was probably some alcohol involved. Hard to remember. Long time ago. So you mentioned the character issues. I'll kind of piggyback on that a little bit. There's some red flags I noticed, and all of them individually are really innocuous, but I start putting them all together. And there is, I don't want to say character concerns because that's not fair. We don't know the kids. So I want to qualify everything we're going to say with that statement. But there was the issue with the bowl game. I don't know what was going on after that game, but the other kid came in, throws like 5 or 6 touchdowns, and his teammates, Caleb's teammates, are rallying around that quarterback and saying, hey, we a team now. That makes me wonder, why weren't you a team before? And normally I'd let that just fly, let it roll off my back. I don't think about those things. But when I put that next to the, hey, like in the tweet of, hey, Chicago Bears don't draft Caleb Williams, I hear about, I don't think this is from Caleb, but I think it's from his dad or someone in his camp that's kind of managing things, about the equity thing, wanting ownership stake in the team and wanting this and that and whatever. Hey, rookie contracts are locked up, dude. The only thing you're going to be negotiating is going to be the offset money. So, you already said, hey, that's not going to happen. Definitely isn't going to happen. But you start piling all these things up and you start to wonder, is this guy some kind of diva? And I don't know the answer to that question. And I don't want to say he is. I still think for talent, without getting him in an interview room myself or anything like that, this guy still deserves to be the number 1 pick in the draft. If he goes anywhere that's got just a couple of weapons and just a reasonably okay play caller, he's going to end up being a guy that should be taken in the 101, 102, maybe 103 at the furthest drop in super flex dynasty rookie drafts. I can make the argument for Jayden Daniels. I can make the argument for Marvin Harrison going potentially ahead of him, depending on your build.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's the only red flag I see on this guy. And hopefully Lincoln Riley didn't ruin him from a coaching standpoint. I really feel like that team was poorly coached, poorly managed last year, and it really reflected poorly on a lot of the guys there, which is probably why the guys that went pro, and then the guys that all exited out of there via the transfer portal was so numerous. They lost a lot of talent. And I think that's also pretty telling about what was happening there, in LA. So I think that's probably all we need to say about Caleb. We know he's going to be an excellent, excellent player. I don't know that he's going to be Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, or Jalen Hurts for fantasy. But where do you think he falls in? Do you think he's kind of like better than Joe Burrow? Would you rather have him or Burrow?
For fantasy, I mean, I would rather have Burrow. Yeah. I mean,
okay.
So I feel like everybody's fallen in love with him. Probably that Trevor Lawrence, Kyler Murray tier, somewhere in there.
So we're thinking, okay, and this is in no particular order. We're just going to throw some names out there, so don't crucify us if you think this is a ranking thing. Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Jalen Hurts. Are we thinking, C.J. Stroud? Are we putting Jordan Love ahead of him?
Ooh, that's a good question. Because Packers, man, they got all those young receivers that are only going to get
putting
better.
you on the spot, my
they
guy.
They got two tight ends.
Yeah,
man.
So around Jordan Love, so that puts him at best QB6, QB7 ish, and this is assuming he goes to Chicago, right? We're gonna
I'd say probably QB10. I mean, I feel like I have a hard time fading Anthony Richardson any lower than that if he plays 17 games. I mean, that guy could just break fantasy completely.
Absolutely. What about Brock Purdy? Man. He doesn't run, but man, he throws a lot of touchdowns.
Yeah, he's probably in the QB 10 to QB 12 range, probably. I mean, I feel like Caleb is more of a bet for Dynasty than he is for redraft at this point. But
well, of course. And that's what we're talking about here, guys. We're talking Dynasty. We'll talk about redraft in August. We're not there in January. So we're thinking you draft this guy at the top of your Dynasty rookie draft. He should immediately be considered somewhere in that QB 9 to QB probably 14 range.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. I think that's excellent. Cool. I can dig it. Let's go ahead and check out the next guy. The next quarterback off the board, according to most folks, is going to be Drake Maye out of UNC. A lot of people liken him to Justin Herbert, which, by the way, we did not mention Justin Herbert in that group. That might push Caleb down one more spot. A lot of folks liken Drake Maye to a Justin Herbert type. Big, strong, fast, prototypical size. He's got the arm strength. He can run. He does a little bit of everything, right? Talk to me about the strengths of Drake Maye beyond obviously what I've already mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was 2022. He led all of college football in big-time throws. He had 45 big-time throws, 8.4% big-time throw rate per PFF. Yep. I know PFF's kind of came under fire a little bit lately, but I love that stat because being able to convert on third down, it is the NFL. You can't convert on third down. It's just hard to survive.
It's true. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like he didn't have Devontae Walker for like half the year this year. I would have liked to have seen both of those guys together. North Carolina's team, he was kind of in the same boat with Caleb, that like both of their teams kind of fell off. They weren't necessarily playing on great teams. I mean, they won, but obviously they didn't win to a level of some of the other quarterbacks in this draft.
Sure.
So I feel like with him, he got a little bit better. I feel like my biggest flaw or complaint with him in 2022 was he would just run 20 yards backwards and then try to find someone downfield. And he's gotten a little bit better at like climbing the pocket and not bailing whenever he sees pressure. That was probably my biggest concern because you just can't do that in the NFL.
Sure.
I do wonder though that, and maybe I'm overanalyzing, but I think maybe him and Caleb, maybe halfway through the year, it almost seemed like both of them had gotten a little bit bored because it was like they were kind of out of the college football playoff, but they were still playing, and like they know they're going to be top 3 picks in the draft because it kind of looked like some of their games that kind of fell off at the end. I just wonder. I was like, man, was this guy just bored?
I think there's probably something to that. These guys are probably saving themselves for the draft. It's bound to happen, right? I mean, these guys are looking to the next step, and they know, USC and UNC, there wasn't a lot of future there, right? There wasn't a lot of, hey, we're going to a premium bowl game. Hey, we're going to the playoff. Like there's no national title run, nothing like that. So it's really, I don't say they're going through the motions, but I could definitely see some of that. When I look at Drake Maye, I see a player that has, good but not great foot speed. I don't think his speed and athleticism is going to translate to the NFL as well as other people think it will. He runs around right now kind of like a Josh Allen type where he's nearly unstoppable at times. But I think he's going to be more like Justin Herbert, where he's not going to run that often. And when he does, it's going to be 8-10 yards slide down. I think a lot of those riskier plays are going to get coached out of him. They're going to ask him to throw it away more frequently. So I think the completion percentages will come down a little bit. And to your point, He needs to climb the pocket more. And some of that's just going to be, frankly, having people to throw to. During his time at UNC, we watched that wide receiver group change pretty radically, right? You had some really talented guys, then you had nobody, then you get Walker back, and it was, the talent levels around him just really varied. And you could see that in his performance. He was a little, I want to say, dependent on those receivers, but it's really tough to be competitive against teams like Clemson and Florida State and these guys that are getting elite athletes all the time, every year in every recruiting class. And he's trying to throw it to a bunch of 2- and 3-star guys. It really wasn't apples to apples watching those guys get covered up. It was tough watching the footage when I pull his cut-ups up and he's trying to throw and run around and do things. And I'm looking at the receivers on the All-22, and they've got guys pasted to their hip pocket. It's pretty tough to be a quarterback and make plays there, but he has every tool imaginable. This guy deserves to be a top 3 pick. For my money, he's actually the 3rd guy. He's not the 2nd guy. We'll get to the 2nd guy in a minute. But for fantasy purposes, I think he's definitely locked in as QB3 in this group. I do have Jayden Daniels ahead of him. I'll start there. If he gets into the right situation, and I'm going to just go ahead and say it's Washington, right? We'll say Caleb goes to Chicago. Let's say Drake goes to Washington. He's already going to have Jahan Dotson and Terry McLaurin. Anyone who's ever heard me on any show, I'm a really big fan of quarterback architecture. I like to know what's around the player, right? And in that particular situation, when you've already got 2 very good wide receivers, you've got a good running back in there, with Brian Robinson, even Gibson, if he sticks around, it's a nice secondary option there. There's a lot of weapons there. And all Washington really has to do is get themselves a competent play caller. There's a lot of them available in this coaching carousel right now. And depending on where Harbaugh lands, Belichick lands, which could be Atlanta and Los Angeles Chargers respectively, there's a real chance Washington could potentially pull a guy like a Bobby Slowick, who's already has a relationship with Adam Peters, the new GM there. It could be a guy like a Ben Johnson who comes from Detroit. Those are systems that are going to be very quarterback friendly. And we could see some success from him early on. I hate to predict rookie success for a quarterback, but my take here is that he's probably going to be in that quarterback 16 to 22 range, probably as a rookie. And that's because he's not going to give much rushing. I'm putting him at about 400 yards before we know where he lands. I'm just speculating, right? Call it 400 yards rushing, but then the rest of it's passing, right? What do you think about where he should be? Do you think he falls kind of in that range, or do you have him higher?
No, I would say in that range sounds good. I think you made a good point that, he's athletic, but I don't know that it's going to translate as well as people think. That's probably really well said. I think Daniels has more upside in terms of his season that he just put together was very similar in terms of just running and passing like Lamar Jackson's Heisman season was.
Yep. Well, and it's not a coincidence that he happened to have won the Heisman. Why don't we transition right into Jayden Daniels? Quarterback, LSU, Jayden Daniels. Obviously, this guy's an athletic specimen. He's got I would say a big time arm. It's big time enough. To me, arm strength, velocity, and that arm talent is a checkbox. You either have it or you don't. I'm not trying to say that he's got the kind of arm where he's going to Josh Allen it through a concrete wall, but it's enough. He checks all those boxes. And to your point, Lamar Jackson-esque, I would say he's probably 85-90% of what Lamar Jackson is as a runner. He's agile, he's quick, and he has long speed. He can really break your back. If you go into man against him or sticky zone and all that coverage starts to fade back off the line of scrimmage, he'll make you pay. He'll take off for 25, 30 yards, and it's the kind of play that could potentially turn into points, or at a minimum, it's just keeping drives alive, right? I absolutely love what I see there. I know you are the Jayden Daniels truther, so I'm going to let you kind of pick it up. Talk to me about his strengths and maybe some things you'd like to see him do better.
Well, if there's one thing I want to see him do better, and this is actually a quote from Nate Tice. He said, "I want to see Jayden Daniels stop treating his body like he's Johnny Knoxville." And if you watch him out there sometimes, I mean, he's just like, he doesn't slide. He's like trying to run through guys, and I'm just like, oh my God, like slide, please slide.
Yeah, get down.
Yeah, I think.
Did we see that against Florida State?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he rushed for 1,250 yards, 10 rushing touchdowns. He had like 41 10-plus rushing 41 10 plus rushing attempts last year. I mean, I think what I loved is, but I love his deep ball, and I really just loved everything he did as a quarterback this year. I felt like he threw like with such great anticipation that he was just like he had like a mind meld with Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors, who are both really good receivers in their own right.
Yeah, there.
But we hadn't really heard any much of Brian Thomas. I mean, Brian Thomas was pretty heavily recruited, but he really didn't do much until this year. I feel like Jayden Daniels kind of unlocked him.
Sure.
You know, I think what's impressive about Daniels is he had a 10.5 ADOT. So it was like he was just spraying the ball all over the field. And I just like how calm he is. He just doesn't really ever seem to get rattled. He kind of stays mellow. I kind of think that's kind of how you have to be as a quarterback. I mean, yeah, Tom Brady obviously had his fiery moments, but I feel like for the most part he was pretty chill. And I feel like that's kind of what you have to be. I think people are struggling with Daniels because they're like, what took this guy so long? Well, COVID happened in 2020, really cut the, Pac-12 season short. I believe they only played 6 games. 2021, he was so up and down. I think he figured, you know what? Arizona State's not going anywhere. I'm going to transfer. He got a fresh start with Brian Kelly. And ironically enough, I mean, Joe Burrow kind of went to LSU and kind of did the same thing, didn't he? So I feel like my biggest thing with Jayden Daniels is people are like, well, what took him so long? What took him so long? I just think you got to look at the 2023 tape, like independent of itself and just forget about those other 4 years. Like you just got to look at what he did last year. He just feels really, really pro ready to me. Like this guy did it against the SEC. I don't think the SEC was probably as good this year, top to bottom, as it has been, but I just feel like he did everything. I mean, he did everything he was asked to do. It was like he ran it, he threw it. He didn't throw interceptions. He didn't turn the ball over. He threw it deep. He threw it short. He threw it medium. I mean, he was unstoppable. And everyone's like, oh, well, they were only 9-3 or whatever it was. But it was like his defense was terrible. LSU's defense was a joke.
Yeah, there was 2 players on that defense that are going to be locked in first round picks, and then there was a bunch of dudes that are kind of jags, right? They're just not going to be anything at the next level, and you can't really survive that way in the SEC. The fact they won 9 games, I think, is a testament of him dragging them, kicking and screaming in a lot of ways. You already mentioned how he runs, he throws, he can spray it all over the field. His arm strength I thought was fine. I wouldn't say, I think in this class, he might get found out at the combine a little bit. He's not going to have the same arm strength, I don't think, as obviously Caleb, as Drake Maye, Michael Penix. I think people are going to look at these other guys throw the ball. Even Joe Milton is going to, probably crank it up and just
he's got a rope, man. Joe Milton's got a freaking rope.
100%. He's, there's nothing happening, at least not enough happening, I should say, in terms of the way his mind talks to his feet. It's going to be a bigger problem. But when we think about Jayden Daniels, he's going to throw at the combine, and he's probably going to look really inferior compared to those guys from an arm strength standpoint. It's okay. He still checks the box. Some of those guys are just freaks, and they have big, big time arms. I love for fantasy. We're here for fantasy, right? I love how he runs. I want him to take care of his body more. That's kind of the opportunity, right? Maybe even a red flag. It's like, dude, you've got to get down. You've got to slide, or you're going to end up getting RG3'd, right? You just won't be here very long. But if he can keep his body right, he can slide, and he starts making better use of his body and the NFL rules. This is a guy that, at any given season, can throw for 3,500 to 4,000 yards and rush for 1,000. I think he's really got that kind of upside. And if a team really harnesses that the way, Baltimore did with Lamar early in his career, we could see one of these guys that gets an MVP award in his rookie contract. The upside is there. The ceiling is there. There's a very strong argument where if you wanted to take Jayden Daniels as the 101 in a super flex dynasty rookie draft, I wouldn't be able to argue with you. Because if he goes to, say, Atlanta, and you're going to surround him with Bijan, Drake London, Kyle Pitts, a really objectively strong offensive line, and let him just do what he does, he's going to have an incredible rookie year. And he could finish, year one as a top 12 quarterback. And I know that seems a little bombastic, might be a little over the top at this point. We don't even know who those coaches are going to be or what team he's going to be on, but that's his ceiling. And so his floor, though, is Anthony Richardson got hurt in week 2, week 3? something like that.
Yeah.
That's the floor. He gets hurt early and we never see him again. And so it's a huge range of outcomes. Okay. But you draft for upside. And if you're in a position and you can get that kind of athlete on your team where you can say, hey, I'm in 1,000 yards rushing roughly, and I'm going to get 3,500 more passing. These are like PlayStation type numbers, and he's capable. The guy had 5,000 yards and 50 total touchdowns. I'm talking total yards, total touchdowns this year for LSU against the SEC. And even in a down year, the SEC has better defensive players across the board than almost any other conference. It's not like he was playing in the Sun Belt or he's playing in the, whatever, the ACC or the Pac-12. Like, he was playing real defenses every week. So absolutely love this kid. Some of the hangups are going to be, hey, is he going to take care of his body, right? Let's watch him at the combine. Don't freak out when he doesn't look like he has a monster arm. It's strong enough. That's what matters. Let's go ahead and skip over to the next guy, though. And I almost left this guy off the list. Wasn't thinking. Michigan quarterback, J.J. McCarthy. And I know you and I both really enjoyed J.J. McCarthy. We've seen some of his strengths kind of play out this season, even though he didn't have a lot of volume. Talk to me about J.J. and the things you fell in love with when you started watching his film.
Well, this guy has every intangible that you want. And this was something that Dane Brugler talked about this week. When this guy was a senior in high school and he had committed to Michigan, he was reaching out to other recruits who had picked Michigan and said, I hope you aren't coming to party. I hope you aren't coming to get girls. If that's what you want, don't come. He was telling guys, we're going to Michigan. We're going to grind. We're going to win a national championship. We're going to bring the program back and we're going to get drafted. That was what this dude was telling people at like 17, 18 years old. So I can't help but feel impressed by that. And he has every intangible. This guy just oozes confidence. And I believe going back to high school, this guy was like 67-3 as a starting quarterback.
Something like that. I saw the stat on Twitter. It was something crazy like that.
Yeah. So his teammates love him. I mean, everybody would go to war for this guy. I think people are going to get misled because they're just going to look at the box score and they'll be like, who's this guy? He threw for 200 yards and whatever. But you got to understand the context. The Michigan had the best defense in college football. They had two unbelievable running backs. So it didn't make sense for them to drop him back 35 times a game. I mean, their wide receivers were okay. They weren't great. I think the one tight end that they have, his name's slipping a bell. He can't come out to the draft till next year. I think he's going to be a good prospect.
Yeah, we're not worried about him.
This guy didn't have a ton of weapons to throw to either, but like I just felt like he was really good on third down, which I mentioned earlier, which is a lot of the NFL. And like whenever Michigan needed a big play, they needed to move the chains. He got it done. So went 15-0, won a national championship, and I think sometimes, Twitter and everybody else, they get annoyed when we talk about win-loss records, but man, NFL teams just eat that stuff up. They love that. So
Andy Dalton got drafted.
Yeah. So I think with McCarthy, I mean, he's raw. I mean, he's still just 20. He's not even 21 years old yet. So there's a ton of untapped potential with him. So I just feel like for someone like him, he's got to go to the right situation. But I absolutely love his pro prospect because, some of the other quarterbacks we're going to talking about, these guys are going to be 24 when the season starts. So it's like, what is their ceiling? How much better can you get? I think that was the argument that you and I had for Kenny Pickett. And so far, we've been correct in our assessment of that Kenny Pickett was pretty much maxed out by the time he got to the NFL. That sure, he could play in the NFL, but there really wasn't anything left for him more to do. Is that fair?
Yeah, you want to see room for growth for sure. And I think he has that in spades. There's a lot to be made of the volume aspect. And I hear the folks on Twitter, I hear the fans at home when they check out the box, well, he only threw it 13 times. I don't care. Let's make that clear. Don't watch the full game breakdown on YouTube. You're going to spend 3 hours watching 13 pass attempts. It's going to make you nuts. go check out the cut ups somewhere. Go get on Caddy's cut ups on Patreon. Go check out, I want to say it's Dynasty Nerds or somebody has, a bunch of game footage also, or if you have a bigger subscription to, some other service where you can actually just see the cut ups for him, where you're just watching throw after throw after throw. What you're going to find is a guy that has a very smooth drop back. He throws well in rhythm. He's insanely twitched up. This is a very, very quick responding, quick twitch, quick movement guy. When there's pressure up the middle, off the edge, wherever it's coming from, he feels it and he can get out of the way. He takes the occasional bad sack. Every 20-year-old does. It's not a big deal. Fact is, he doesn't take many of them. He drops back, he gets the football out, or he drops back and he takes off running. He's quick. He's not long fast. I don't think he's Lamar, Jayden Daniels, kind of long fast and quick and everything else. But the guy is hyper twitchy. He's got great agility, great acceleration. He's the kind of guy that can chip in 500 yards without looking and without blinking. I kind of liken him to, I want to say almost like an Alex Smith type of a quarterback. If I could take like Alex Smith's mobility when he came out, because he was a pretty mobile quarterback. And like Jared Goff's kind of precision and accuracy. And people are going to say, Jared Goff accuracy? He actually has great accuracy in the intermediate space of the field. I don't care what anybody says. The guy does a nice job putting the ball on target. Ask him on Ross St. Brown and Sam Laporta about it. This is a guy that's going to play at this level, play at a high level. What I would really want to see is I want to see him sit a year. I don't think he's quite as raw as people think. I think he can play right away. What I want to see is him fill out his body a little bit. This guy's 6'3" or so. Mm-hmm. He might be barely.
Yeah, he's got to be 200 pounds soaking wet.
Right. He's super slender. And I'm not so worried about a guy getting broken. He didn't get hurt, at Michigan, really. Like, he was mostly healthy. I don't think he missed any games. He might have had like a little ankle issue at one point. No big deal. But if he could play behind Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, or Matt Stafford for a year, let him learn the system, let him really absorb it all. Man, that would be huge. We're talking about a guy that could have that kind of first year as a starter pop, where he becomes a high-level starter, maybe not a fantasy dynamo, but he's a high-level NFL starter who immediately raises the value of all of his pass catchers. And so it's definitely something to be aware of. So if you're highly invested, say you're into, say you got a lot of Puka and Cooper Kupp and those guys, and he goes to the Rams, you don't have to sell Puka the moment, Stafford retires. And same thing can be said, with the Jets. You got a lot of Garrett Wilson. I'm holding. I'm not selling there. He gets behind Rodgers. I'm happy to have McCarthy thrown to Garrett Wilson. Makes me real happy. Same thing can be said for the guys over in Minnesota. So some of the question marks are about the volume. Can he do it without Harbaugh? Heck, is he going to be doing it with Harbaugh at the next level? We don't know, right? Like, Harbaugh could end up somewhere where he ends up drafting, JJ McCarthy, or trades up to go get him, or whatever that might look like. So it's a situation to monitor. I don't think he's going to be the fantasy stud we'd love for him to be, but this is a highly functional NFL quarterback.
That's fair.
So we got two more guys we'll try and shoot through. And these two guys are both going to be at the Senior Bowl. Can't wait. I'm actually going to be there in Mobile. I'm going to try and shoot some content while we're there. Kyle, I don't know if we're going to be able to get on together for those shows or not. I might just be doing it from a hotel room. We'll see. Let's go with Michael Penix Jr. from Washington. We saw him in the national title game. We talked about him 2 weeks ago on the show a little bit. I know we already waxed poetic about this guy, but now that we have all of the picture in place, right, all the footage, we know everything about him short of the Senior Bowl and the Combine and all that. Tell us about Michael Penix.
Man, I mean, what a comeback story, right? That he was at Indiana for 4 years. I believe he had his season end almost every year because of injury. He tore his ACL twice. Kalen DeBoer goes to Washington. He transfers with him. And, they were just like a match made in heaven with all the receivers. So, he's, going to be 24. I really enjoyed watching him play. I mean, I was watching Pac-12 football like every night, late at night. I mean, that was so fun. And just watching him just drop back, and it was like he would just drop passes like 40, 50 yards downfield, like right in the bucket. And, I think he kind of just got beat up as the season went on. Like, he played, 15 games. I think by the time they got to the Michigan game, I mean, you could tell his ankle was bothering him on a couple of those plays. I feel like he's maybe being dinged for that a little more than maybe he should. I do question the medicals at the combine. Like, are any teams, medical doctors, going to have an issue with the fact he's tore his ACL multiple times? I don't think it's as big of a red flag for a quarterback, maybe as it would be a running back. But man, there's so much to kind of unwrap, because it almost feels like he throws the ball better 30 yards downfield than he does 10 yards. So I just loved watching his deep ball. But
I think we all remember the deep passes. That's for sure.
How well it's going to transit at the next level, I don't know. I think he's got some decent mobility, but he's probably the least mobile of the 6 quarterbacks that we're talking about.
That's
I mean,
fair.
he has some mobility, but I don't think he's going to run much at all. He's definitely a pocket passer. I think for him, I want to see him complete more passes kind of in the middle of the field. Michigan kind of took away the deep ball, either kind of with playing, cover 4, or they were kind of getting pressure and he couldn't throw downfield. So Michigan kind of made him kind of complete more passes in the numbers. And I felt like he just kind of fell off rhythm all night. Like he just never really got in rhythm.
That's the right word, rhythm. So my notes, when I went through and broke down Michael Penix, obviously his deep ball is well documented. We'll come back to that. But I've kept writing down rhythm passer, rhythm passer, rhythm passer in games where they're able to get him going early. And I actually thought he did okay in the short and intermediate space when they were using slants and digs and in breakers. But when they had designs on that allowed guys to be open, where he could get the ball out in his first or second read, he'd get into a nice early rhythm, kind of get that lather on, and he'd be white hot the rest of the game. But conversely, if they don't get those first few completions, they don't get this guy into that rhythm early and kind of get that mojo flowing, he really struggled. And if he gets taken out of his rhythm, it really struggles for him to get back into it. And I think, as teams start really breaking down his film, they're going to see all the traits, right? When you see this guy he's like a howitzer, right? He's just launching the ball 70 yards down the field effortlessly in the bucket. If you've got fast receivers, guess what? They're not going to be able to outrun his passes. It'll be okay. That guy can gun it. But if you get into a spot where defenses get mixed up on him a little bit, he gets bounced out of his rhythm, something happens, maybe an ankle gets rolled up on, like in the national title game, it's easy for him to get punched out of that rhythm. And now all of a sudden what happens is he goes from being Superman to being, Clark Kent wearing a kryptonite necklace, right? He's struggling all of a sudden. And, I think he offers a lot of tools. He can run. He can do a lot of the things that you alluded to. I don't think he's going to run like McCarthy. I don't think he runs like Drake Maye or any of these other guys. But when I think about he can run, he's better than, Rodgers, probably Tua, Brock Purdy. Like he's going to be one of those guys where he's better than the bottom third, but he's not going to come out here and get you a bunch of fantasy points that way. The 2 ACL tears, a few other minor injuries. He played most of last season with cracked ribs from that first Oregon game. And he was wearing that monster flak jacket. You guys probably saw it in the playoffs. He has that thing on and he kept trying to get underneath it. Like something was aggravated, in the national title game. That's the kind of stuff where I'm like, man, can this guy just stay healthy? Like you don't want to say injury prone. It's kind of, it doesn't mean anything, but he's had enough bumps and bruises. Mentally, no one's tougher. He's come back from all the adversity, right? He's done it all, but can his body hold up to what his mind wants to do? I don't know the answer to that question. Yeah. And that's the only thing holding back my grade on him.
I think he probably settles more as a day 2 pick. I feel like maybe somebody like the Raiders, if they don't take a quarterback in the first round and he's still there in round 2, the Raiders feel like a good fit for him based on kind of their personnel with, Adams and other stuff that they do.
Do you think they could trade up in the back of the first round? Do you think the Raiders would be a team to kind of try and come up and say, hey, let's move up 10, 15 spots or wherever we're at there to, get that 5th-year option on?
I think it's possible because on average, most teams only have 20 first-round grades on guys per year. So really, when you get to the back of the first round, there's really not that much difference from there probably until pick 45, pick 50. In my opinion.
Right.
I think this year is probably going to be a little different because I think this is a really, really deep draft where I feel like that 25 to kind of 35, 40 spot is a sweet spot,
Sure.
where
Yeah.
it's like there's still a ton of talent available, especially at tackle, especially at wide receiver. Um, yeah, that's just really going to depend because I feel like a guy like Penix is probably not really going to benefit from sitting. And I kind of look at Bo Nix the same way. I was like looking at these mock drafts and it was like, man, the guy's 24. Like if he's not ready to play now, you know what I mean? Where
When's he
McCarthy,
gonna
I
be
think
ready?
it's like McCarthy's 20. It makes way more sense to sit him for a year or two versus, okay, this guy takes over as our starting quarterback and he's 26 now or 27, right?
Exactly. You're like, man, he's gonna be by the time he's starting, he's getting his AARP card.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah,
mentioned Bo Nix.
Roger
Yeah,
Staubach,
I
man.
think
I don't think he started until he was
yeah,
27 or 28.
yeah, and I don't think we got a lot of guys on that career trajectory in this class. To say he's a Hall of Famer is a big deal, and we'll get to some of
only
those later in the
because
process.
I think that was because of his naval commitment.
That's true. Yeah, he went into the Navy, and wasn't he like cut by the Steelers, and then he ended up with the Cowboys or something funky like that?
No,
Or was that Johnny
that
Unitas?
was United.
Unitas.
Unitas.
Oh, my bad. I'm getting my 50s and 60s eras quarterbacks mixed up. Let's get back on track here. So Penix, for fantasy, I think we like him. We probably don't love him. I think we're fans of his game. We love watching him play, kind of can't miss TV. But there's going to be some lapses in there where he's going to be kind of a migraine for fantasy. Probably the type of player where this is going to sound weird, but if you're in Superflex and you're drafting this guy, it's probably one of the only quarterbacks in the league where you're saying, you know what, I got to handcuff him. A lot of guys this year were drafting Lamar and still going and getting Tyler Huntley, right? We might have the same situation with Michael Penix. And until he proves he can make it through the season as a starter, you probably want to pair him with somebody. So, we like the talent, but there's a couple of shortcomings for fantasy there. Let's get to Bo Nix. Now, this is a guy where I don't think there's going to be a more polarizing guy this draft cycle because we're already seeing a lot of the really high profile people, Lance Zierlein, Daniel Jeremiah, and so on, just waxing poetic about this kid. Talk to me about what you saw. You've been up late talking about the Pac-12 and watching these games every night. What did you see in Bo Nix?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one's hard because I like the intangibles for Bo Nix. Like I like the adversity. And I even said this earlier in the season. I said, this guy kind of flamed out at Auburn, but like to his credit, he's gotten better every year. He's cut back on the turnovers. He was kind of a guy I watched as a freshman, felt like he tried to do too much, tried to make these crazy off balance throws, throwing pick sixes and doing all this Carson Wentz boneheaded stuff. To his credit, he's really, really matured. And I think he's going to interview well. I think teams are going to like him. He's got the leadership. He's got, he's already married. So I do like that. I do like a lot of that stuff for Bo Nix. He's very mature. I think teams look at that more than we think. I think where it gets tough, Oregon's offense is such a tough evaluation because if you look at his passing chart, it was like 67 of his passes were either behind the line of scrimmage or only 0 to 9 yards. So he wasn't really throwing downfield well. And I was even watching a lot of Troy Franklin's tape, and Nix is like underthrowing him downfield, and Franklin's having to adjust back to the ball. And I'm just like, man, this is not going to translate well. So I do like Nix. I think my concern is like, he's going to be 24 as well. Is he pretty maxed out? Now, I do think he's a pretty good athlete. I think he's someone that could really light it up at the combine. Probably going to run faster than we think. Wouldn't shock me if he ran like a high 4.5. Like this guy clocked in at like a 4.58 or something. Really wouldn't shock me.
Sure.
So I think he's going to do all those things well. I think my question is, how well does he translate in the medium area of the field?
I think that's a valid concern. I look at Bo Nix, and you already mentioned some of the shorter passes and some of the things that, players had to come back for throws where they weren't quite on target. He's big, he's strong, he's plenty athletic, he does a lot of great things. Here was the big thing that stood out to me, though, that was kind of in the negative column, which is probably why I'm, I guess, pulling away from some of these, high-profile folks that are all over this guy. He's looked amazing against some really bad, really soft teams. Okay. when he's had to play in the last 2 years, he's had to play really good teams with NFL caliber talent on the defensive side of the ball. His numbers drop like a hot rock. We've got to use, obviously the Georgia game last year, 2022. It's his first game at Oregon. I understand. I get it. But you got rocked 49-3. That's a problem, right? They didn't score and he didn't look good. You got to show up in those games against the top 25. This year, he plays Washington twice. Both times, that defense is probably one of the better defenses they played all year in terms of defensive talent. You're going to have 3 or 4 of those guys will be in the NFL in the next 2 years. And both times, he got beat, right, by Michael Penix. And then both times, his numbers came off of his season averages. The touchdown to interception ratios dropped. The passer rating dropped. Completion percentage dropped. Everything across the board dropped. Now, I get it because, hey, they're better players. He's not going to do as well. But he dropped by a lot. You're talking, almost by half in a lot of these efficiency cases, or 10 to 20 points on the efficiency metrics. And when I start seeing large drop-offs, and I'm not seeing that heightened performance against good football teams, it starts to make me wonder, what's he really going to look like against NFL caliber talent? And I can't wait to see him at the Senior Bowl. I can't wait to hear the interviews and see what he's really like. I want to see him in the practices because we're going to get to see him going head-to-head with Penix and really grade him and see how he responds to NFL coaching. And frankly, similarly talented players. And if he can ball out in those practices, look great in those drills, and he can show us something in that game, I'll probably start to change my tune a little bit, and maybe I warm up and come around on him. But at this moment, he's my 6 out of all these guys. I don't have a high grade on him. I don't think he's going to be great for fantasy. It's a guy that's probably going to get overdrafted in a lot of leagues. Say he goes in the first round of the NFL draft, a lot of guys in Superflex Fantasy are going to go jump up and grab him. Look, when other managers in your league are making mistakes, don't get in their way. Don't interrupt them. Go ahead and steal the value at wide receiver or some of these other position players. Guys like Jatavian Sanders could be a steal, and some running backs could be a steal. And there's a stack of wideouts. Let somebody else fall in that grenade. I like the kid. I like some of the traits. Something's not quite right upstairs where he doesn't bring it against the best quality competition. And until I start to see some of that, Senior Bowl, Combine, etc., it's really hard for me to back this guy.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think he projects more as a day 2 pick for me. But
sure,
like we said, all it takes is one.
Only one. That's it. And I wonder, I think it was Daniel Jeremiah stuck him on the Saints at pick 14. And I see that and I'm thinking to myself, you got Derek Carr locked up for some money right now. They've been in salary cap straits for years. They're in a compromised division. Why wouldn't you go get another playmaker on defense or trade the pick out and get some more assets, right? Do something to help build that defense back up. I feel like the Saints have bigger needs than that. So, I know it's a first mock draft and it's January and we shouldn't be that stressed out about it, but landing spot is going to be absolutely critical for this guy. He's going to need to go somewhere with an incredible infrastructure, great coaching, great weapons. I'll be honest, if this guy slips, let's just say he slips deep into the second. I know that's probably a reach. A team like Miami, where Tua really struggled down the stretch, could be an interesting spot where if he ends up there, getting the ball to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and Devon Achane and, Raheem Mostert isn't difficult. And I think he could really succeed in that kind of an environment. It seems like a stretch, right?
That's interesting.
But these are the kinds of things that can really pivot. Yeah, so I don't love him right now in a vacuum. But, man, I'll tell you, that landing spot could change some things. If he balls out in the Senior Bowl, that could start to really change some things. But at this moment, I really was frustrated by what I saw in terms of the competition level going up and kind of his profile shrinking a little bit. Seems like a really good kid. I like everyone uses marriage to equate to maturity. For those of you that are married, Kyle and I are both married. We're used to being wrong. So that's why we do a fantasy football podcast. But at least we know somebody can stand the guy, right? It's hard to be a diva when you're married because your wife keeps you in check. And so we've got, of the married guys here, what do we got? We got Bo Nix. Isn't Jayden Daniels married too?
I don't know.
I'm not sure there, but I thought we had a second guy in the top 6 that was married. I know JJ McCarthy's got the longtime girlfriend. There's some well-documented footage from last year's playoff about that. But I think that's our top 6, man. How do you feel? Is there anything we missed?
No, I mean it'll be all eyes on Quinn Ewers and Shadur Sanders, and I think Carson Beck for next year. I think those are probably the top three. Um, I do like Ewers if he can kind of clean up a little bit his mechanics and footwork, have a big year. But I think this class definitely shakes out to be very good. So, or at least has tons of potential. So,
Yeah, I mean, it sure does. I think there's a lot to it. A couple honorable mention guys that we didn't really go into depth on. Joe Milton, Tennessee, freak athlete. He's going to blow up the combine, but man, he just doesn't bring it on game day. This Tennessee team was a shell of itself without Hendon Hooker. Joe Milton was a fraction of what Hendon Hooker was. And we see kind of where that's led so far for Hendon. He's had the injuries, third round pick, stuck in Detroit behind Jared Goff. I don't expect Hooker to be a player either as a starter in the NFL or for fantasy. Sam Hartman, incredible touch. This guy feathers the ball like few players I've seen. Really nice accuracy, does a nice job completing passes all over the field. Great leadership. He's another guy, mature guy, grad transfer to Notre Dame, won some big games. If he can start somewhere, he definitely is going to get plenty of opportunities for ads and being a spokesman for beard softeners. He has just a luxurious beard. Let's see, who else do we have? Spencer Rattler. We'll get into him more probably after the Senior Bowl. And who are we missing? Was there anybody else that should be honorable mention in this thing?
No, I feel like we kind of covered all our bases.
Fair enough. It's getting late. I mean, I know we're going to release the show on Monday, but it's actually Friday night, the 19th at 10:07 p.m. Eastern.
Is, man.
I mean,
past our bedtime,
man. We got to get to bed. Yeah, we got to get to bed here. So for Kyle Lindemann, I'm Jeff DiMatteo. So long. Good luck. Next week, Senior Bowl primer. Do not miss it.